So Dreda, Tony, good to see you both.
Oh, and you as well, Joy. Thank you for coming.
Total pleasure into your lovely home. And we're here to talk about this amazing writing partnership that you have. And also it coincides with the launch of your latest book, Vendetta.
Vendetta, yeah.
So obviously we know you as a crime writer, as a broadcaster, educationalist, one of the few black faces on Newsnight Review on BBC Two. But you published your first novel, Running Hot, 10 years ago in 2004.
I can't believe that.
Can
you believe that? Wow.
You know, and the fact is, you know, the whole crime genre is very male-orientated, very white male-orientated. Mm-hmm. So when you won the John Creasy crime writing dagger for your debut novel, very few women and no black women. What was that like? I mean, was there a lot of pressure on you? The fact that
I didn't even think about it like that. I think I had such a great first publishing experience because my first publisher of Running Hot were Maya Press, who were a small independent press, Maggie Hammond and Jane Havell, and they operated out of both their homes in kind of Hackney. And it was just such a wonderful experience. And I have to say, I never thought I would ever get published because when I started to try to become a writer, I didn't even think about that. So kind of getting published was a bonus. And oh my gosh, there's another bonus. We've been shortlisted for this prize. And wow, and we won because I saw it as a we win. You know, me and Maya, that kind of a vindication of them starting a small publishing house for their homes in Hackney. Mm-hmm. And it's only later on all those discussions about, oh my gosh, there aren't many female black crime writers. There was another one at the time, Nicola. I can't remember Nicola's last name, but Nicola, I believe, has only written one book and she hasn't written for many, many years. And I think I'm kind of the only one out there. And it wasn't until a lot of many years later that I started to think about it. But at the time, I was just really pleased to be a published writer who won a national prize.
I mean, what attracted you to that particular genre?
I think it got me. I'll tell you what, when I was writing Running Hot, I thought it was a social commentary piece. Mm-hmm. It was a piece about redemption. And I didn't even think about it as a crime book, even though it's about a young guy set in East London in the crime world and he wants to get out of crime. The story that we've heard many times before. Mm-hmm. And I remember, it's funny because me and Tony, we used to go to parties and people would say, what's this book about? And we used to go, it's a social commentary piece. It's about redemption. You could see people moving back like, whoa, that sounds well heavy. And it was only when another well-known crime writer, spoke to my publisher Maggie and said to her, you do know this is a chase thriller. He's got 7 days to get out of Hackney and there are 2 gangs after him because he makes a false move at the beginning. Will he or won't he make it? The clock is ticking. And then when we went back to parties and people said, what's your book called? We'll go Running Hot. What is it about? Well, it's about this guy in Hackney. There were 2 gangs after him. And they were like, yeah, when is it coming out? You know? So it's that kind of a transformation, I suppose, from thinking we're just doing a social commentary bit to thinking, no, I can do a genre piece of writing and underneath can be the subtext of what some of the key issues that I'm writing about.
Well, bring Tony in at this point because a lot of people know you and associate you with, the crime writing genre and particular books, like The Tune and so on. But you write together. You write as part of a partnership. So
partnership.
So Tony, how do you fit
and
into
it's always
this?
been a kind of a partnership.
I mean, I think with most writers, there's a bit of interplay with their partner, and I write as well. Mm-hmm. In the early days, it was more sort of lemon and ice in a gin and tonic rather than actually formally collaborating with that. But although obviously, when she changed direction slightly, Dreda changed the direction slightly, then we started to do it in a more formal kind of way. But so from the start, I think most writers who live with people or who know people do some sort of thing, they're swapping ideas, they're mixing things together. So that was what it was like in the beginning. It's been a little bit more formalised this time, but obviously she still takes the lead on that.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to how you actually work together. And how the gin and tonic analogy works, and if you more the gin now. But after Running Hot did so well, and the fact that outside of the expectations you're going to place on yourself, there's expectations of you. Did you have the second book syndrome? You've got the second album syndrome. I know Courtier Newland talks about that quite a bit. It's a serious, it's quite a big issue. Did you find yourself in that situation?
It was an interesting one for me because, people talk about Running Hot doing really well. And Running Hot did well in the sense of raising the consciousness within the crime genre about a particular type of crime book. It garnered a lot of critical reviews. It wasn't a huge seller because it was an independent book. So I didn't feel like there was a massive amount of pressure on me.
Okay.
However, I did think about what am I going to write? And the kind of choice was taken out of my hands by lots of readers, including people in my family, were saying to me after reading Running Hot, are you going to write about that character next from the books? Are you going to write about this character? And I didn't really think I was going to write another book. And then I just thought, I would love to write a book about Lord Tribulation, Killer Tune. And then what I saw around me was a lot of people from, my dad's generation, your parents' generation, who were either in England getting older, people were dying, people were going back to the Caribbean, and it seemed to me we were losing something. So I kind of wanted to do a book that was set now, but also back in the 1970s, and particularly 1976, and also that big event at the Notting Hill Carnival when there was that real explosion of tension between the police and youth, particularly black youth. And because that was the first time my mum took us to the carnival, was we got stuck there and watching all this kind of mayhem around us, really. And so for me, it was more going to research and talk to people. But I didn't really have a problem writing it down. I found it really exciting, actually, because it was about music as well. I thought, oh my gosh, how can I experiment? And I thought, why don't I do it like a double album, like Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life and those kind of double albums you used to get in the 70s. Instead of just normal chapter headers, why don't they have each be called a track? And I found it exciting. I found that book exciting. It's not been my most, if you like, commercially successful book in terms of sales. But in terms of critical acclaim, the second book was the one that really just garnered.
And the second book was?
Killer Tune.
I mean, how did you write when you were writing more or less yourself?
Yeah.
And then how do you write now? What is your process in terms of how much you're willing to say?
Oh, shall I answer?
So you start first. How you write?
Okay, yeah. How did I first write? Well, I don't know if I told you my story, but I first started writing because I went off to the Groucho Club for a creative writing class and got there. And then it was Maggie who was running the class, who then became Maggie and Jane, who set up my press. And so I wasn't expecting to get published, you see, because she originally asked me, just give me the first chapter of your novel. And I had the first chapter and a few other bits and pieces that I'd cobbled together from her class. And then they came back 2 weeks later, her and Jane, and said, we want to publish the whole thing. And they gave me a deadline. And I thought, wow, this is great. And then I got home and I yelled up the stairs, help! I can't do this on my own, And what was interesting, and then Tony said, oh, I'll help you, because we met years ago at a creative writing class at Goldsmith College.
Right, okay.
And so I knew, obviously, and Tony was writing his own things as well. So I knew I've got a writer in the house. So we sat down and he started to help me. But particularly around the plot, this was interesting. It was particularly much more around the what happens next engine of the plot, particularly around the action, I think, in the plot. So every Sunday, we'd go down to Stoke Newington to a cafe, and we'd ask the question, what happens next? And I think that gave Running Hot that kind of narrative drive. And I think that's one of the first places that we realised plot and moving plot forward is really, really key and key to a story. And then when I wrote Killer Tune, Geezer Girls, Gangster Girl, and Hit Girls, Tony just naturally helped me more and more with the plot. And hey, I'm not going to say no. You know, I've got a plot master in that house.
That's on the next T-shirt.
I'm still waiting for my money. Say that.
He got a few pennies.
Okay. Get your priorities right. Yeah.
And it was only when I switched literary agents, and I was going to switch the type of crime I was writing to thriller writing and to a series, I just went to Tony, we sat down and we thought, should we do a bit more? Let's just see how we get on with a bit more of a formal kind of collaboration. And what we recognised is the books have already got a style, they've already got a voice, there's a Dreda voice out there. So it has to be that voice. So whatever is written has to be what we call Dreded up.
Right.
So if Tony wrote any bits, it had to be Dreded up. It's got to sound like
he
it.
knows your yes. Yeah.
Because our writing style is very different, isn't it?
It's very, very different.
It's really interesting.
So how would you then describe your style? Not you. How would you describe Dreda's style? And how would you describe Tony's style, Dreda?
Oh, gosh.
All right, so
Tony,
don't say rubbish. Don't say rubbish.
Oh dear, that's a very, very difficult. I mean, it's so individual. I mean, if you read a page of the writing that Dreda does, it is very, very individual to her. Her choice of verbs and adjectives and sentence structure is very, very different from mine. Now, I couldn't tell you. It's a bit like how do you describe an elephant? I know an elephant when I see one. I know Dreda's writing when I see it, but actually pulling it apart and saying what is it about it that makes it distinctively hers, I probably couldn't answer. We tend to start at the end, where it's just going to end, and then how we're going to get there. I think, but I mean, it's a to and fro process. You're changing your structure as you go along, and you're changing your writing to suit the structure. So it's a bit of a difficult process to understand.
It is, but I think
sometimes you don't really know why you're doing exactly.
But there are some fundamentals, like so we sit down and we plan, but we plan around who is our main protagonist and what is their problem. That's what we plan around. What is the dilemma that this character has, and the whole book is some kind of resolution around that dilemma with a couple of subplots probably going on underneath as well. And so every chapter, at the moment we're writing very short chapters, and usually it'll just be 1 or 2 scenes. So really we're writing scenes. And at the end of that scene, we have to ask ourselves the question every time, how is that moving that character towards solving that problem or not solving that problem? And obviously it's a crime book, so they've got to solve the problem. Then, oh my gosh, I didn't see that one coming. So, oh my gosh, they've not solved the problem like they thought they had. So it's their kind of journey. So it's always asking ourselves that question. So, and I think that's why crime writing tends to be very strong. It always goes back to that protagonist and that kind of singular journey more than anything else.
Why does it work? Because the fact you're both sitting here, the body language is not too hostile.
No.
Why does it work? Why do you think it? Because it obviously does. So why and why do you still continue to work with each other?
I think we're both working class backgrounds, so we've both got a work ethic.
Yeah.
I do have to hustle him along sometimes. We've both got a work ethic.
I'm an artist. See this now? Here you go.
Exactly. Still in bed. Yes. So we both, come from backgrounds where you get the job done. We've got to get the job done. We're incredibly hard workers. We're both hard workers. We're both incredibly ambitious. We both love reading, so we both love reading ourselves. So we're bookies ourselves, really. Yeah. So when we're writing, we want to create something that we want someone else to read and go, wow, hopefully at the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think also we've kind of learned as we've gone along, and a lot of people don't get the opportunity to do that anymore with writing. I mean, particularly for me, because I was one step removed at the beginning, it's the kind of thing where you can't do anything until you've done it, and because we've been doing it for a while now, it's a kind of we've learned how to do it, and I think that's and crime writing has a dynamic of its own, it has a rhythm of its own that you can't deviate too far from, or readers get unhappy, quite understandably. So I think we've kind of learned how to collaborate. We've kind of learned how to write, and that's the kind of, I think that's probably why, as a basis for collaborating, that's probably better than let's just write a novel, because in the beginning you don't really know what you're doing.
And what's interesting, because our TV thing, because we've been collaborating on a TV project, which we can't really say much about, with somebody, a very well-known face, shall we say.
Okay.
And that's been interesting because we've both come into that at the same point, if you like. Whereas, kind of, if you like, Tony joined me on my journey.
We're both getting told no.
But that's interesting. So you've got I feel like you've got a lot more freedom when we're writing that project than with this one. So it doesn't have to be dreaded up, does it?
No,
because of
but
the nature of it.
That's collaboration plus TV.
Yes,
there's a lot more people involved, and there's an order of, and in that kind of situation, it's not to in and fro-in, it's to in and fro-in all across the board. So that's a completely different situation again. But I mean, obviously, because Dreda kind of set the tone for the whole thing, that's why people come back for what's already been done, and you're building on that. If you kind of jump on the train halfway through the journey, then obviously you haven't got a full ticket, really. So that's kind of how it is with that. With the TV, it's completely different because we kind of both went into the building together, didn't we? Really?
Yeah. And plus, as well, writing the books, we write them really quickly. So Death Trap, which is the book after Vendetta, we wrote it in 3 months.
And it's very it's very interesting. In America, so much American TV is done by groups and teams.
It is.
And you've got
the quality. Absolutely.
You're flying blind if you're doing it on your own. So, I mean, obviously people do, but if you're batting ideas around and people are saying, "No, I really can't see how that's going to work," or "What about this?" That's kind of. That makes the whole thing more pleasurable. It makes it more interesting as well, I think.
The thing I want to go back to is when you were talking about the collaborative approach. Yeah. But also, the top of the interview, you were talking about the crime fraternity and how supportive they are. And I think that's something that has struck me, particularly through your career, and the fact that, I met Martina Cole somewhere and, Dreda, and you guys are mates. Yeah. And she's worked out back incredibly successful and very down to earth. Lead child, Jack Reacher. Yeah. Who's very supportive and admirer, fan of your work. I think you have all the how can I put it, the reviews from your peers before the journalists even get a look at it. I mean, what is it about crime writing and the people it attracts that generates that type of support and ego-less behaviour?
I think, first of all, it's because it was a genre that was almost under attack from other types of writing, if you like. And I think particularly literary writing, people didn't consider it literary writing. It was what we talked about earlier, kind of pulp, throwaway, disposable. And so there was kind of a fraternity within that crime writing genre. No, we're not. Our work is good. So I think before I came along, people had a cohesive community to kind of as a platform, as a celebration of crime. And they work really, really hard with their readers, you see, crime writers. And that's one of the things I think it just is kind of out there, really. And I also think with crime writers, when you meet them, they're usually people who've worked in the world before for a long time, rolled their sleeves up, have an understanding of the world. Whereas sometimes people might say I'm wrong, but sometimes what I find more in the literary world, if I can use that term, is people maybe have come from a narrower world set, I've come from just university. It's very, I remember, in the literary field, you'll hear people talking about, there's an amazing writer coming up from Oxford and Cambridge University. You don't hear that in crime fiction, Crime fiction people almost come from the street, if I can say that. They come from life, and that's what they bring into their books. And that's what I think that their readers like, is they've just got an authenticity in terms of their voice. I mean, would you agree, Tone?
Yeah, I think it's partly that, but I think it's just a bigger world in every sense of the word. It's more readers, it's more writers, it's more publishers, it's more books. If you are really good at it, you can make a very good living out of it. And I think people who enjoy that kind of success, in some ways, I think success makes you a better person rather than failure. I mean, you're not scrabbling around for a review in some obscure magazine. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of the big names are so generous, and they are extraordinarily generous. Because if I was Lee or Martina or one of those huge big shots, I would be by the pool every day. I would not be worried.
That's what I'm having to deal with.
I wouldn't be worried about some guy who was just starting. I'm thinking, you look after yourself. I'm having another.
I can see who's keeping you level. What I love about the blurb for, the promotional blurb for Vendetta, 2 murders. 2 different crime scenes, 1 killer. Straight away I thought, film! I mean, firstly, what is it about? in brief.
Yeah.
Would you say? It'd be quite interesting to see.
Yeah.
If you agree, disagree. And secondly, my thing about the fact that it really feels that this screams to be a film, you know. And
yeah. Well, I mean, it's about Mac, who's an undercover cop. He wakes up in a hotel room. All he can remember is going into the hotel room, and then that's it. He wakes up. He's got a wound in his head. There's blood everywhere. He knows he's got to meet a woman here called Elena, and he finds her dead body with her face shot off. She'd been shot through the back of the head. Who killed her? And he made a vow to look after her. And all he can remember is something is happening at 11 o'clock tonight. Is that something connected to her? And Mac met Elena because she works in an arms trafficking gang. He works in the arms trafficking gang. The only problem is Mac's an undercover cop and Elena's in the gang, and he shouldn't have fallen in love with her in the first place. Plus, he finds his gun near her body. He can't be sure he didn't kill her. So is he chasing himself throughout this book?
Or TV series, either one.
But I think this is much more of a crossover book because this isn't about East London. So Vendetta is the start of a new thriller series. It's not about East London. It's about 3 cops, and each time one of the books would take the story of one of the cops. So one of the characters in Vendetta that you were talking about, people have been quite excited that they're excited about is Detective Inspector Rio Ray, who's a black female detective in the Metropolitan Police. And Rio is a really interesting character. So the book that we've just finished writing, Death Trap, is Rio's story.
So is it going to be a trilogy then?
More than a trilogy, I would imagine.
Yeah,
so we're really moving it around.
Yeah. We wanted to sort of mix and match characters to stories and some of you, if you get a new character and they're interesting, you think you can do something with them in the future, then you kind of build them up a little bit and move, characters from one book to another and storylines that kind of finish in one book and then you pick them up again in another book. So that's kind of what we're trying to do.
Even some of the bad guys, they're not finished yet, And it's really interesting because you end up with this world of kind of people, although having written this now and having heard what people have said about Rio, which was interesting because we kind of got to that point, we kind of see her now as a real nucleus of the whole of this kind of series. So we'll just see what happens with that. Yeah.
HBO. I want to ask a cheeky question because I can see the enthusiasm from both of you, particularly you, Dreda, about the Rio character in Vendetta, this black female cop character, which we're not familiar with here that much. If you had the opportunity to cast anyone in that role, who would you pick?
I've got 3 people. Can I think 3 people? So there's Sophie Okonendo, Marianne Jean-Baptiste. We can get Peckham Girl to come back. That would be fabulous. And the fabulous Gina Yashere.
Okay. That will surprise a lot of people.
I'm telling you. Yes, Gina, I think, is up for it. I think people forget that Gina did some really great dramatic roles.
Yes.
And to me, I could just feel, because Gina, I mean, I don't know since she's been in the stateside for quite a while, but Gina to me was one of those, London girls and stuff. And Rio is a real London girl.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can imagine her wanting to do, I don't know if it's a kick-ass role, but I can imagine her.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, that would suit her down to the ground.
Yeah,
so,
but I hope a much kind of nuanced role as well. A lot of very interesting character that might talk about when Death Trap comes out. Because she's
when is that out? When is Death Trap
in August.
Oh, so 2015, yeah? Okay.
Yeah. So I think she's an original character. I think she's a unique character. We want to take her forward. And I just think there are enough great black actresses out there who could really do a terrific job of her on the screen.
Well, good luck for the next phase of Vendetta and the series. And great meeting you both and talking to you, Tony.
You too.
Thank you, John.
Nice to meet you.